Cheers.
Cheers.
Phil's been lost in America for too long. He doesn't do tea anymore.
Well, okay. I'm Phil.
And I'm Phil.
And this is the Phil and Phil Show.
So tonight we've got
season 2 in 2021. Season 1 was 2020.
Season 1, episode 2, isn't it?
Yep. Well, it's season 2, episode 2. And
Okay.
we made it. We made it through 2020, which is incredible.
Yeah, we made it.
But still alive.
So welcome everybody. This is episode 2 of 2021 and continuing on New Year, New You. So tonight I'd like to introduce you to a great man, Sarmado Sibley. Briefly, he's a 5-star Michelin chef, transitioned his way through to plant-based and raw food, plant-based, which is really what got me twigged onto Sarmado when I saw some of his amazing creations on Instagram and Facebook. And I started following him and we had a few exchanges in comments. And then one day I twigged and went, so this is the guy that my friend Nicola, she's a macrobiotic chef, has been trying to introduce me to for something like 10 years. So then I was down with Nicola once and I said, Sarmado, yeah, I've forgotten. I said, right, I'm talking to you now, I'm gonna message him and say, hey, let's connect, come on the show. So Sarmado's got a great story. I'm not going to share too much because I'm going to see if I can ease this out into being a really interesting chat. So we're just going to chat and,
Okay.
I'm going to ask some questions, Sarmado. And so one of the things I've been, when I was driving home tonight and I was, thinking about our conversation and the title which Phil and I have got in, which is New Year, New You. One of the things that really struck me with our conversation that we had a few weeks ago before Christmas, when we were just getting to know each other and deciding whether that, how the show would work for us. And you shared your story, which I really would like you to share tonight, which was the part of kind of the difference really between being in a Michelin kitchen and then coming into the world of raw food and realizing that there was a real stark difference, not just in the ingredients, but the knowledge and the way it was prepared and everything else. And that in our conversation that we had really struck me. And so just to give you, Sarmado, a bit of a background on Phil was Gabriel Cousins' manager at the Tree of Life Rejuvenation Center in Arizona, where I trained to become a gourmet raw food chef. And one of the things that became very apparently clear there was the awareness, the consciousness and the presence of preparing food. And Phil's really aligned with that is preparing your food with great awareness and consciousness. So Sarmado, without any further ado from me, if you'd like to introduce yourself and we'll guide ourselves through that journey.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you very much for both inviting me on tonight. It's great to see you. Yeah, I mean, wow. I mean, it's such a great opportunity to have the conversation like with both of you guys tonight in this kind of format where it's just kind of easy and flowing, and I'll try and remember things as we go along. So guys, if anything comes pops into your head as I'm talking, then let's kind of get this kind of 2-3-way vibe going. But I think going back to that conversation that we'd had before, coming from a Michelin star kind of training or background, what really got me interested or attracted to those or those kitchens, that food, was being able to eat in these restaurants when I was in kind of my early teens, my parents were really big foodies. And I was really fortunate to be able to get taken to these restaurants to eat the food. And one of the earliest memories was a guy, he was a chef called James, and he was the head chef of this kind of country restaurant in Sussex. And the first thing, when I got introduced to him, the first thing that he did was not actually take me into the kitchen to see all of the madness and the chaos and everybody preparing this incredible food. He actually took me into the gardens, and he took me into the greenhouses, and he showed me how the peaches were growing. I'd never seen how a peach grew because it was growing on a vine in the conservatory. And then as we turned around, he showed me the vine leaves, and then he started talking about connecting with the gardens and the seasons and seeing what the gardens provided, and then using what the garden was providing to then get creative in the kitchen and see what menus you could develop. So I got very early on immersed into these kitchens where produce was arriving in the doors, not just from the kitchen gardens, but also from all of these kind of markets all around the world selling, you know, basically the finest kind of gourmet ingredients you could hope to work with. So I think that was kind of one of the earliest memories I had of being in those Michelin star kitchens. And then, of course, when I started my apprenticeship, we were getting deliveries from Paris, we were getting deliveries from Italy. Everything was seasonal. We had the truffles, we had the wild berries, we had the mushroom foragers coming in the kitchen doors. People that were really passionate, you know, they were foraging in the fields, or they'd be harvesting seaweed. That was the energy which really got me lit up and really excited. And I was only 15, but being in that space where there was this kind of crazy chaotic energy fueled up on testosterone under a lot of pressure, you know, these guys that I was working with, and it was predominantly guys. I mean, I think in the 3 years I had an apprenticeship, I met one girl who was a chef. Unfortunately, it wasn't balanced out in the gender roles. So you had this very kind of masculine, I mean, it wasn't the healthiest. I mean, I could really go into some stories, but I think the light bulb moment for me around food at that age was that you were working with all this colorful live produce. And that was what was exciting me. But then what happened in the years after that, and I worked with some incredible chefs, but it was very pressured. You know, you wouldn't sleep, you wouldn't, you know, there was loads of alcohol, loads of partying, and God knows what else goes on in those spaces, you can imagine. But it was wild, and it was pressured, and it was really stressful. But the finished product looked fabulous. You know, we were using the best ingredients. There was so much precision. These guys that trained me, they had such a remarkable skill set. But it was all about the presentation. It was all about executing cooking techniques. So in terms of, you know, Phil being in America and having this conscious experience with Gabriel Cousins, it was probably on a kind of awareness level, the polar opposite of food. Because, you know, we've seen, particularly here in the UK in the past 10 years, certain chefs who I won't name here, but, you know, they've been publicized for their aggressive, violent, you know, their kind of abusive language in the kitchen space, which is not healthy, which I didn't know at the time. Food then in the Michelin star kitchens, it was all about presentation. It was all about taste. And, you know, the skills that were being used, you know, they were phenomenal. But there was nothing in those kitchens on a nutritional or conscious level. I think the consciousness that I felt in those spaces was coming from the growers, the farmers, the producers, the foragers, the real artisans, you know, who'd got these techniques that had been passed down through their kind of family lineage, or they still held heirloom seeds. It was that was really the nourishment that I found. It wasn't until kind of fast forward 15 years later, or nearly 20, when I then met a guy, a friend of mine who was in his 70s. He'd started raw veganism and he looked phenomenal. I mean, he was bouncing down the street. His eyes were bright. He was positive. He, a girlfriend a third of his age, cracking jokes. You know, this guy was like so switched on, and he was raw vegan, and it was ailing a lot of his symptoms. So spending time with him, and he also taught me macrobiotics and introduced me to a lot of that concept of food. That is where something, the two worlds kind of collided. Mm-hmm. Because towards the end of that Michelin star experience, not only was I physically burnt out because of all the partying I was doing, but then on top of that, there was nothing lighting me up, really. I mean, you had one product, which was, I don't know, the best of its league, from France, or, you know, we were using the best stuff, but it wasn't exciting me anymore. And then suddenly when I learned that food could be medicine, and then going through my own kind of cleansing and detoxing journey, the pieces kind of linked up again. And then I became fascinated, and then something new was able to come through, because that then has the consciousness, that then has the awareness, and it's also the effect that it has on the people that are around you or the people that you're working with. So it kind of, that's kind of it in a nutshell, really. Yeah,
that was one of the things that really struck me about your food, Sarmado, when I first started following you on Instagram, was the quality of the food that you were producing and the vibe.
Thank you.
You know, and I can't remember my first comment, but I think it was a cheesecake you made.
Right.
You know, and it was just wow, because your food, you know, there's really someone behind that. It's not just someone that's decided they're going to make a raw cheesecake. It's not just someone that wants to be famous all of a sudden. It's someone that really can produce food. And because, you know, I've trained in a kitchen, I've worked at events, I've run my own little kitchen at events. And I've worked with brilliant chefs as well. And and yours just, it stood out. And so I knew that you had something. And then I learned that you were a Michelin chef, and I was like, okay, this guy really knows what he's talking about, because he's getting the brilliance of being a Michelin trained chef, and he's bringing it into raw veganism and creating super conscious food. And that, you know, and that's, it's not just about, for me in raw veganism, and I know Phil was very, very into this as well. It's not just about the fact that it's raw. It's not just about the fact that it's vegan. That's halfway. Mm-hmm. The consciousness that's involved with producing your food, the awareness, the presence, being present. Wow, you know, it's a present, right? So all of a sudden your food turns into a gift because you've given it presence, and that's what presence is all about. You have to give presence. So all of a sudden your foods turn from something stunning to look at and stunning to taste to having an amazing energy with it as well. And that, for me, just, I know Phil feels the same thing. It just speaks volumes, doesn't it, Phil?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Yeah.
I don't really know where to go with it, but it's like, I mean, let's just take presentation, take quality of the food out of it for a second, and go, what, like, not for everybody, but what do we think about when we think of mother's cooking? We think of like this food that makes us feel loved and cared for, and, or whether, you know, caregiver that's prepared food for you. We feel loved and cared for so much, that, because that's so much more important than the presentation and the quality. But then you add the quality to it, and that was always at the Tree of Life. It was amazing quality food. Everything was always organic, a lot of stuff from the gardens, you know, sprouts freshly grown. We had all of that, and we put some beautiful presentations together. But for Gabriel, he's like, he's like, number one is the consciousness of the person preparing the food. And we were like, you know, what music are we playing in the space? Are we leaving our, you know, negative energy at the door and coming in fresh and clear? Because that is going to go into the food and that is going to be felt. So that was absolutely critical if Gabriel's intention. And, you know, I'm really not that good a chef, but for me, it's more about preparing food with consciousness, preparing food with love. Like, and we had some amazing chefs at the Tree of Life coming through. I don't know if you know Chad Sarno, he was there for a while, and just some phenomenal food, but some amazing chefs, all of them really, really conscious people, really great. And, but yeah, I held the space for the program, and we had some amazing apprentices come in and just prepare some great food. And it always came back to those who were most conscious, most present, and you could really just feel that energy coming into your body. You know, another example I have is like, I went to this amazing restaurant in New York, Pure Food and Wine. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Yeah. Sarmado Mangalis, isn't it? Yeah.
So, but it had that energy on many levels, really good quality, great presentation, yet there was a little bit lacking in spirituality. So it like they had that, like you could feel that like chaos in the kitchen where like a lot of the chefs were drinking wine and they feel stressed out, and then it ended up crashing and burn. So you probably know that energy. And then I got my favorite restaurant here in Phoenix, and the guy who runs the space is always there. He creates this space of love, and like whatever he prepares, I eat it and it digests great. And it's like, it's not even all raw food. It's like, but it's plant-based. It's really clean. It's all organic. And the servers are really present. You can walk into that space and you're just like, wow, this is just like, I feel taken care of. So it really comes down to the consciousness of the person holding the space, the servers, the food preparers. All of those things make a huge difference.
Absolutely, 100%.
What are you laughing at, Philip?
Yeah, what's going to...
I share with you, I've just found something in the bottom of my cup talking about being conscious and unconscious, because I was late and I was rushing, and I chucked 4 or 5 dates in my mug before I came upstairs. And as I was setting up, I was eating them because that was my tea, right? And I just went like that. I thought, what's that in the bottom of my cup?
What is that? Oh, dates.
It's really so I was totally not conscious when I put my tea into my cup, right? Because I was too busy setting up and getting my microphone and talking to you guys. And I was so that's actually a great example of your mind being somewhere else when you're supposed to be doing something with love. So I got a nice little surprise at the bottom, which is a bonus, right?
Yeah. I mean, it was interesting that, because what you were both talking about as well, and Phil, you sharing about Gabriel Cousins. Yesterday, I remembered something that I'd heard from some teacher many years ago, and they said that food is actually a love letter from God. And going back to your first question, Phil, around the difference of those Michelin star kitchens and the plant or the raw vegan plant-based, is that I noticed that the people that were in the raw vegan or conscious plant-based environment, those chefs, they really knew. There was an awareness of the ingredients. They could talk about the sprouts. They could talk about the farmer that they bought them from. They could talk about a variety of cacao and how that one was better than another one, and how they would ferment the cacao or how they would process it. The people that were working in that raw vegan movement really had a compassion for the ingredient. They treated the ingredients with reverence, and there was a respect, and some energy was coming through them, which was that they were treating these foods as a gift, and then to be able to share that. Whereas the Michelin star kitchens, it was like, right, grab a block of that, take a piece of that, put that in there. It was all very kind of left brain and structural cooking methods. Whereas the raw vegan movement, there was really, a lot of compassion for the ingredients they're working with, because they were treating it as that adage that we know that food is medicine, because they knew that if they were present with what they were preparing, then that energy would then go through them, and the customer or the guest would receive that energy. And yet that doesn't, you know, you hear of people eating in conventional restaurants saying they got stomachache or they don't feel so good, and they put it down to the food. But the energy and the frequency is still rarely spoken of. I mean, kind of in conscious or spiritual kind of groups or in restaurants, it's spoken about, but generally people still blame the food, but they don't think of the person that's preparing. And, you know, there's many times in those, okay, it was the swanky Michelin star restaurant, but some of those people that were behind the door, if you actually saw that person, the question would be, would you want that person to prepare your food? And to be honest, the answer was sometimes or often no, you know. So yeah.
Yeah, that's, you know, and in the vegan movement, they're always on about the stress in the animals, but they're not taking their consciousness that bit further forwards and talking about the stress in the chef, the stress in the farmer, the stress the stress in the shopkeeper. And one of the things that I've been really aware of on vegan forums, and I put something on once, and they were talking about animals feeling, and it's, you know, they were talking about feeling, animals feeling. And so I said something about, oh, so don't plants feel then? Of course they don't. They haven't got a brain and a nervous system like us. And I was like, okay, I can't go any further forwards with that. So the vegan movement on the whole, you know, what I'm going to call the standard vegan movement, doesn't take plant consciousness into account. They think so they think that plants are like animals used to get thought of. So people used to think animals were dead and they couldn't feel, and, you know, they didn't have any emotions and blah blah blah. And now they're doing the same thing to plants. And one of the things I found when I was mainly at the Tree of Life or with people like Chad Sarno is they know that plants have consciousness. They know that plants can feel. They know that plants can feel fear. They know. I was reading an article on an experiment they did with a plant, and they dropped a plant from a certain. I think they dropped it only maybe like 2 inches, 50 millimeters, and as the plant dropped, its leaves went up because it felt the fear of falling. So they kept doing this experiment, and over time, when they did the experiment and they kept the height the same, the plant never budged. But when they altered the height, the plant did that when it got past a certain point. And I was like, wow, the plant even remembered what it was like to fall a certain distance.
Wow.
So the plant could feel and remember.
Yeah.
And I mean, that just takes it to a whole nother level of consciousness. And that's, you know, what we have to, well, not, you know, what we've learned is actually plants are conscious, plants have consciousness, and plants take on your consciousness.
Yeah.
So when you're eating food that's mass produced in a factory with people that don't really care because it's a job, no disrespect to people in the factory, but they're just factory workers. I'm trying to be careful, but I'm just going to say it as it is. The factory workers are just factory workers, and they're producing just food. And then people are going to eat that food and expect to be a whole lot healthier than they are on a meat-based diet.
Yeah.
But what they're not taking into consideration is the person that's making the food, how's their day been? How did they sleep last night? You know, how were they in the morning before they got to the factory? What are their conversations when they're banging that food out in the factory? And so on and so on and so on. So, you know, I think bringing back round to the beginning of the sentence, which is that this new year, new you, you know, this is a real opportunity when you're preparing food for yourself and for other people to be aware that science proves now that plants feel.
Yeah.
Plants have consciousness. So we have to really be aware of how we're preparing our food, and, you know, and not treat it mindlessly. Really, really be conscious, especially with living food. I don't suppose a baked potato is quite the same, but when you're dealing with that freshly picked salad leaves, and sprouts are high consciousness. That's why sprouts in the realm of healing are so great, because they are packed full of consciousness. So let's take those plants, let's take that food, and let's give it the best energy that we possibly can in that moment in time, in every moment in time. So we can actually give our food more consciousness. And I don't think many people think about that. But that's, that's what you're talking about, Sarmado, isn't it? Is kind of adding to the food.
Yeah. Because if the body is like a computer, and the studies from Mauro Emoto, when they program the water, when they put a glass of water in a very negative kind of toxic environment where there's lots of arguing, lots of swearing, it's very discordant, then that water then shows up with very, the crystals in the water, it's quite negative. It's fractured, that's the word. And yet when you put that glass of water in a nice, loving, peaceful, harmonious space, it carries a different frequency. And that then is that kind of life force that you get from the water. Well, if the plants are containing 80% water, whatever we're putting into that plant, whether we're massaging the spinach leaves or whether we're picking that carrot from the earth, every process from the ground to the plate is going to pick up what is the influences from the environment. So that, like you were sharing, Phil, as well, at the Tree of Life Center, being conscious and mindful, and that frequency is so paramount to that food tasting good. Because on a left brain, reading a recipe, vegan recipe, X, Y, Z, and you just put it together like monotone, that can taste very, very different from somebody that's taken the time out to look after themselves and be conscious about setting time aside to prepare it with lots of time, with love, with care, and then present that to the person. That will taste different from a kind of blank, like a bullet point recipe. And what you were sharing about the vegan and the factory, so you can be thinking that because you're eating a vegan diet, it's a healthy diet, but not necessarily, because you can still be eating the processed soy and all the other processed foods that are coming into the kind of vegan arena at the moment. Well, they're not using animal products, but they're still manufactured and processed. And you don't know that that person that's on that factory line hasn't just popped to McDonald's to grab a cheeseburger and have a quick fag before they get back into the factory, which is truth.
Yeah. But that's, that Sarmado is like when the vegans are on the bench of getting people to think about how meat's produced.
Yeah.
It's kind of our job now to get the vegans to think about how the plant foods are produced.
Yeah.
Because it's different. This isn't about torture and all the rest of it. This is just about consciousness, and what consciousness do you want to take in?
Yeah.
And that for Phil and myself has become, it's very it's important.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to go back to you were saying Gabriel's quote. I just pulled it up, and it's so my all-time favorite quote from Gabriel. So, food is a love note from God. Its letters are written by the rays of the sun. It says, I love you and I shall take care of you and sustain you with the offerings of my earth. So just had to, I just love that quote so much. I was like, I got to present the whole quote. So.
Yeah, beautiful. Thanks, beautiful. Yeah.
Hey, Phil, that would make a really good meme to do.
It would. I'll do that.
Yeah.
After this show, it'd be fantastic.
Yeah. And I just want to jump in on some of those things. I think a lot of people have seen that experiment was done where they, because, yes, we want live food, though that's great, but then we can also shift the energy of, a baked potato or rice. Yeah. So there was an example of the rice where somebody cooked rice and then put it on the windowsill. And then one jar, they were like, I hate you and you suck and all that stuff. And they had like a message on there. And then the other one, like every day, it's like, I love you and you are beautiful. And within a short time, the rice that had the hate energy, like started to mold. but the other rice stayed fresh. I think it was like a couple of weeks or something like that. They've done the same experiment with plants where they've like ignored a plant or they've shouted at it, and then another one they've given it love and say I love you and all those things, and that plant thrives. And we know that everybody knows that the best gardeners are the ones who walk around the garden muttering to their plants and like, oh yeah, I love this plant, this is my favorite kale plant, or this is my favorite blueberry bush. And because they understand that, and it's like we've lost touch with that. Everything's like so mechanical, left brain. But I think everybody knows that there's energy. You walk into a room where somebody's had an argument and you can feel that energy. You can cut the energy with a knife. Everybody knows that. We have these things in our language. But then when it comes to like, oh, well, it's food, oh, it's just food. It's just like a mechanical thing where we eat it and we get nutrition. But I think we like, there's a part of us inside goes, no, it's actually more than that. Like it's so much more. We know that the adage, like I said earlier, the mother's love thing, like we know that there's something to this.
It's really good. It's really good what you shared. I mean, I don't know, there was lots of kind of thoughts and memories kind of dropping in as you were talking, Phil. And food as a child, it's the nurturing from the mother. It provides us with the comfort and the security. And there's so much related to those early years that we put down to food, which are going to determine our habits later on as we're growing. And it is, I don't know, I'm kind of going to go off a bit now on another kind of track, but, the food does carry a frequency. And I've met people when I've been traveling or living overseas who've looked incredibly well, incredibly healthy, and they've not been so fixated on having to get a list of certain things within their body to feel that they've nourished themselves, because they've recognized that just the pure reverence of having some beautifully prepared food for them is what is going to give them the love and the nourishment. Just simply, when I was living in India, so many people there were just grateful to be able to eat. The fact that they had some money to have some rice or some dal or something very, very simple was enough to sustain them. And they looked well, they looked healthy, and they looked strong, because that relationship to the food was one of gratitude. So when those two things were coming together, I could see that people were really looking well. And, the dichotomy was sometimes I'd met people who, coming from a Western kind of background, they were doing everything on the sheet in terms of what they should put in their body, but that awareness or that gratitude wasn't there. So they weren't getting the shifts that they wanted to experience, either mentally, physically, or emotionally. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, and it's interesting for me. It's with the Western diet, it's not about how sick people are. What I'm amazed at is with the quality of food people eat, how well they are.
Yeah.
That's actually what I find more mind-boggling, because really, with what people are eating on the whole, they shouldn't be living as long as they are.
Yeah.
But there's obviously a lot more going on. There's a lot more going on than meets the eye.
Yeah. I mean, it's psychologically, somebody can be very strong and they can have a very strong mindset, and they're doing their fitness, they're doing their workouts or whatever. And they just have they're quite resilient. Some physical bodies have a strong constitution.
Yeah, definitely.
Where they can get away with doing certain things with their food or lifestyle, which I personally may have tried to keep up with when I was younger, but it was detrimental to my kind of health because I don't have that strong constitution to live like that. But the sensitivity came from me adapting and learning what foods were going to elevate me and give a healthier perspective on life compared to the fast food mornings after a big night out.
Right.
Yeah, but it does, it makes you wonder. You can see people and they're not, you know, on a kind of nutritional level, it doesn't look like they're eating the right things, and yet they seem to be doing pretty okay.
Yeah, exactly. So
yeah,
you just reminded me of it with a conversation with a friend of mine the other day that had an iridology reading done, and I looked through their iridology reading for them, and one of the things that came up was a lung weakness. And I said, this is really interesting for you because, you know, smoking for you, I said, you know, you've really got to consider it because you've got a bronchial weakness and you've got a lung weakness. So within that, you know, you don't want to be smoking, even though they're smoking organic, really good quality tobacco.
Yeah.
There's the next level down from that is called a blue, which is a light one, which doesn't have all the nicotine and everything else in it. It's a lighter one. I said, look, the first thing you've got to do is transition onto that lighter tobacco because your constitution cannot cope with it. And then you need to consider getting off of it. Whereas other people aren't going to have that weakness in their bronchial. They're not going to have that weakness in their lung. You know, we know smoking's not good for them, but it's not something that's like, oh my God, you've got to get, because some people can smoke all their lives and get away with it. Other people can't smoke for 10 minutes and get away with it. And once we do iridology readings and we can see their constitution, which is exactly what you're talking about, it then gives us a clue as to how we can navigate that. Can we afford to do those things that we love to do? Or if not, what can we afford to do? Do you know what I mean? It's like, you know, if people, not many people like me, it's like, okay, I'll stop that. That's not great. I'm going to do the you know, the best thing ever and beyond that. So, you know, something like iridology is a really good way of navigating that, so you can really take out what is, you know, really harmful for you, because that's your kind of genetic hereditary weakness. It doesn't mean you've got to have that weakness forever. It just means you've got to nurture that. And, you know, because one of my weaknesses has been thyroid, adrenals, and parathyroid. So they're my 3 glandular weaknesses. So I've got to be really careful.
Yeah.
You know, and that's a great way of navigating stuff, is to see what part of you actually have to nurture. So we're going back onto that nurture now.
Yeah. It is nurturing. Yeah.
You know,
I think,
and some people think like a jacket potato is nurturing. Well, it depends what environment it's made in. If your mum made it with loads of love to nurture you purposefully, then that's one thing. But if it's just been made just for the sake of a jacket potato, then so it brings that it just turns that nurturing thing on its head. To you know, is it nurturing or not nurturing?
Yeah. Well, it's like, I don't know. Yeah. Is it nurturing or not nurturing? I mean, only the person taking or eating or experiencing that lifestyle is going to be the one that chooses whether that's nurturing or not. Maybe something has to be experienced for a change to occur. So maybe if there's a I feel content. Okay. So maybe there might be aspects of that experience that are not optimal, but there is a comfort in it.
Yeah.
Unless something comes to the point where you say, aha, I need to lose some weight, or aha, I can't sleep at night, or whatever the symptom is, and then start exploring what it is. Because the funny thing is that most often every other aspect of the life gets looked at, and right at the bottom of the list comes the food. And yet the food is something that we put into the body once, twice, 3 times a day.
5, 6.
5, 6, 7, 8. You know, whatever it is. But it's funny because it's like a general practitioner, isn't it? I mean, most of their study with, let's say, the human biology, a tiny percentage of it is the nutrition. very, very small part of it. And yet, if you keep putting, I mean, we know this as an analogy, but if you don't put the best fuel in the body, then you're not going to get the best result. And yet, the experiences that you can have can so dramatically be altered by choosing to take or put something in initially and then start weaning out the other stuff.
Absolutely.
But again, it's like, I mean, so I used to love working on retreats when we could travel freely, because we'd have this kind of communal space, because then people wouldn't just be listening to you banging on about this product or this, you know, this supplement, this experience, but they'd actually get to experience it for themselves, and then they could walk away and feel that much more empowered in that kind of space.
Yeah.
Because it's one of those things, isn't it? Unless you've experienced it, it's very difficult to transmit that shift that you can feel, whether it is shifting up something with the lungs, or you mentioned adrenals. Yeah. Because it's like what Phil was sharing as well. I mean, food isn't something that you just do. You know, it can become a habitual. It's like, okay, it's 9 o'clock, it's breakfast. Okay, it's 12 o'clock, it's lunch. And you'll kind of go through this rote daily program, eating the same rote daily foods, getting the same rote experience. And it could all be shifted just by tweaking a few things here and there. But it's a program that's just been running and running and running. And we don't get educated about food. We don't get educated about growing food and nutrition and, you know, the seasons and the very kind of basic survival, or, you know, you talk about comfort. I mean, to nurture yourself, one of the greatest gifts is to be able to cook and prepare food. Biggest act of self-love, to be able to do that.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're saying is like, we can eat the best quality and be really in our kind of left brain about it all, and like say figuring it all out. Okay, I've got this amount of these greens and this and like just and we're still sick, because if we're not coming to it from a conscious space, it's not going to be healing. But it's double. You know, we're living these lifestyles, and the first step we often take is starting to change the diet, starting to bring in healthier food, and it starts to shift. And it's like learning your body, learning what works for your body and where you're at, and not beating yourself up going, oh, I'm not 100% raw food, or I'm not this.
Yeah.
I mean, I was strictly 100% raw food for about 15 years. And now I do some cooked food, and I find that works well for me in the city. And it was like, I just remembered like there's one experience I had. I'd been home in England, and I think it was like 2016. And I was raw food then, and my mum made this soup at the end of the trip, and it was a cooked soup, and normally I wouldn't have had it. I had my salad or whatever, and I was like, I decided to partake in the soup, and I still remember that moment, like of having, like I was just like, I'm going to be leaving, so I'm going back to America from England. I've been there for a month, and it's like I still remember that, like as that soup came into my body, like there was love, and I still remember that moment, like right now I can like tune into it, because it was like I received that gift my mom had put into that soup, prepared that soup from scratch. It was the plant-based, beautiful soup, and I still remember it. And it was because that's critical. So, and it nourished my body, you know. So
it's because it's the mother's energy. All that love was going into seeing her son. It was the best way that she knew in that moment to look after her son, and we can really feel that. And you know, I was sharing when Phil and I spoke just before Christmas, and there was the story that I'd heard of the service that they run in Bombay, or Mumbai it's called now, where they have the tiffin boxes. So the wives would be preparing the food for the husbands who would be getting on the train and going to the office. And they have this delivery system in Mumbai where they'd have like young like boys coming to the house to collect the tiffin boxes, and they go all around the addresses with all these tiffin boxes, and then they put them on the train, and the train are going to Mumbai, And then they'd all, in this incredible system, because there were hundreds of these tins, get distributed all over these men's offices. And they interviewed some of the men, and they said, yes, because I only eat this food. I don't eat any other food because I know my wife cooked me this food is the only food with love. And that's all they would eat, was the food that was cooked by the wife.
Wow.
Obviously, if you've got a good relationship, otherwise
You'd
you'd hope so. But I thought that was really sweet, because that kind of just embodied that notion that the food carries a frequency, and if the wrong energy goes into it, then that's why we get sick, you know.
Yeah, there's so much in it, isn't there?
Yeah.
You know, and it's really good, Sarmado, hearing you talk about that coming from a Michelin point of view. You know, not just a pair of hippies that understand it, but actually you've seen that firsthand.
Yeah.
You know, you've experienced that firsthand in a restaurant.
Well, it was brutal. It was really aggressive. The pressure that you were under was tremendous. You know, I was 16 when I was just coming up to my 16th birthday when I started my apprenticeship. And we were doing between 16 and 18 hours a day. I was doing that 5 days a week. And then on the 6th day, I was going to college. And those kitchens are brutal, because when they're Michelin star, you've got such a standard to keep. It doesn't matter if you've got 2 chefs off sick, or the deliveries are late, or the oven's broken down. Whatever circumstances, the food, whatever's going on, has to be perfect and look exactly the same today as it did last month, regardless of the situation. So the pressure's tremendous. You're not sleeping, you're not eating properly. You've been drinking and smoking God knows what till all hours. It's volatile, you know. But that said, it did give me a very strong foundation and structure to build on. And I'm really grateful for that. And funny enough, I look back, and the first job in that apprenticeship, I was working on the veg section. So I used to receive all the fruits and vegetables arriving from the gardens, and I go and work in the gardens sometimes, and brush the wild mushrooms as they came in from the fields. And that was, you know, because that was live, you know, it had frequency to it. It was all the other stuff that used to play out in the kitchens was the challenge or the test. But yeah, it's a big one, frequency. And everybody's losing it. It's chaos, you know, everyone's screaming and shouting. There's punch ups going on. There's, you know, it's all kicking off out the back. And yet the double doors would, I was telling someone the story the other day, all hell would be breaking out the back, fires, punch ups, everything. And then these double doors would open up, and the waiters would gracefully walk through with these with these plates like it was some kind of ballet, you know. It was incredible. Yeah.
So somebody asked a question on YouTube. What is your most, I don't mean to interrupt, Phil, what is your most powerful mindful meal? Like, what do you like to eat?
Oh,
I don't know if it's a different tact, but
it's a bit like, what's my favorite food?
Mm-hmm.
It's really difficult to answer, only because it's always changing. I mean, at the moment, I'm growing lots of microgreens. I'm doing lots of kombuchas and kefirs, and I'm making really good cashew cheese. And I can have that with some buckwheat crackers. So cashew cheese, buckwheat crackers, and microgreens. I'm in heaven. That, you know, that's so good. I was even inspired by Phil with his watermelon juice. So I've got a watermelon. That's going to be my kind of juice elixir tomorrow. Sometimes in a colder winter month, it's been a macrobiotic meal, you know, like steamed brown rice and tempeh with some greens out of my garden. Yeah.
It's just really simple. It's not anything fancy. It's just a simple meal that you prepared yourself and you just sit down with consciousness to eat. It really comes down to that. Like
that's it.
Like at the Tree of Life, like for pretty much a year, I was eating like kale salad twice a day, and I was totally happy. I wasn't going, oh, I need this and I need that. It was like just my kale salad with my spirulina, and my spiritual practice came first. And it was like nothing fancy, but it was like that was what was nourishing me at the time. And then it changed, you know, like we go through these changes where it's like we're eating this every day, and then it's like, oh, then the new thing comes into season. And I think that's natural, and different cycles of the body. So
it's so true. And the thing is, when it was simplified like that as well, those simple meals that you enjoyed at Tree of Life, you know, that kale salad, or sometimes I'd have kale chips, and sometimes I'd sit there and I think, wow, I think having a garden as well and learning about the growing seasons and cycles and stuff like that. And I'd have these kale chips and I think, my God, that's taken 3 months to come out of the earth. And then I've got really good tamari or really good tahini or whatever the marinade was that I'd used to put on those kale chips. There was so much appreciation for all the energy that had gone into those ingredients that those kale chips, it's like, yeah, that's me done. Till tonight, I'm done. You know.
I mean, if you get good kale chips with a good like, I quite often use I make a sunflower seed sauce to go on a kale chip before I stick them in the dryer. And actually, you know, when they come out, that's a meal.
It is a meal.
Yeah, I think the thing with lots of these things is people are afraid of it because they're used to having lots of different things.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, if you want a big bowl of just kale chips, just eat the bowl of kale chips and don't worry about, because I think the other thing that I'm learning as well is thinking about what nutrients are in what and how much of this I'm getting and how much of that I'm getting.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And at the moment, the easy peels, the clementines are in season at the moment. And in some of the supermarkets, I can get organic ones. So I'll sit down and have maybe 2 bags. I don't know, 15 clementines. That's me done. Nothing else.
Yeah.
You know, driving back tonight, that's what I had. I had a bag of clementine. And in the afternoons, I have half a watermelon. And actually, the thing that I'm finding now is the simpler that I eat, the more nourished I feel. And that, you know, that kind of goes against everything that we're taught. But actually, one of the things I found is if I have a really nice, if I make myself, or my partner makes me a really nice salad that's got all the trimmings on it, amazing. I always feel there's something missing afterwards. It's like my body's hunting for something. I've got no idea what it is. Apart from the only thing I find that satisfies that is something sweet afterwards, like some dates or something like that.
Yeah.
But when I eat clementines, like 5 or 15, whatever it is, I don't have that. I don't have that need for something else afterwards. It's really, like watermelon juice in the afternoons. I drink a litre, so I have half a watermelon. It makes about a litre. I don't go, oh, I don't feel satisfied. What's next?
Yeah.
I drink the watermelon juice. I'm done, and I carry on.
I think you know in your body, Phil, like you know what's right for you. So that's good.
Yeah. So, but all the, if I go out and have a gourmet meal, which is very, very rare, because number one, there's hardly any restaurants in the UK that do gourmet raw.
Yeah.
Or I don't like how it's been prepared. If I eat enough of that, then I'm fine. But if I don't eat enough of that, then the courses have to start flowing.
Yeah, and just when you were talking about the simplicity of it, like the clementines, it's like, I mean, you've done so much cleansing and detoxifying. What I was sensing when you're speaking is that when you are following that kind of raw vegan plan around food and just eating intuitively what feels right, is that it's almost like a detoxifying as well. When you're getting rid of all of those, those waste products, or maybe it's emotions, or clearing, detoxifying the space, that spaciousness that you feel when you keep the food really simple, it's like it just feels very clean and open, like you're more receptive to things coming in. Whereas recipes, let's say vegan or plant-based recipes, it's like, yeah, you need this bottle and this spice and this, and it's full, your cupboard's full of ingredients, and it can complicate the mind when you're trying to put all of these things together.
Then you're trying to balance it out.
Yeah. And maybe I want it sweet, maybe I want it sour, and then I need something and it kind of goes on. Where with the watermelon, or like I was doing the kale chips, it's like I feel when I'm eating it, because I'm so grateful, I'm getting what my body needs right now is being provided. I'm getting everything that I need right now, and the moment that I need something different, my body's going to tell me what I need. Which kind of goes against all the kind of mainstream plans as to what you should and shouldn't be eating. 3 meals a day.
It makes me think of coming back to the conscious eating of that. Whereas if we're eating it to just get the next mouthful, or eating it consciously, or eating it so that we're thinking about the dessert that's coming next. It's coming back to what Phil said at the beginning. It's like we're in the present moment with that. It's like that bowl of whatever it is, we're eating it very conscious, not going, oh, when I finish this, then I'm going to get my dessert, or I'm going to get something else. Oh, I'm going to leave the house and go somewhere else and do something. It's like instead we got to, and it's hard. It's really hard. We got to work hard to be present in that moment with that eating experience. And then it's going to nourish us much deeper.
Yeah. So true. So true.
So, Sarmado, what's your favorite dessert to make?
Talking about desserts. Let's move right along from this consciousness stuff. Let's get some dessert.
Come on. Let's get down to the sweeties.
Do you know what? Funny enough, it's what you mentioned at the beginning. The cheesecakes. When I first got into those, or the raw vegan cheesecakes, that was when I was like, oh my God, this kind of switches things up big time. Because I'd worked as a pastry chef, and we'd had butter and cream and sugar and pallets of dairy arriving into these kitchens. Because when you go to a restaurant, you get your nice little dessert on the plate. It looks really cute and it tastes really yum. But when you're in a kitchen and you're doing hundreds, if not thousands of that recipe every week, and you see the volume of that product that comes through the kitchen door.
Oh yeah.
If it's coconut sugar or raw cacao, I can feel the frequency of it and I feel alive. But back in those Michelin star days, it was dairy, it was animal product. And it was like, whoa. So when I then got into the cheesecakes, and it was actually, it wasn't a cheesecake, it was in Thailand. I was doing a detox in a spa there. And one of the desserts, it was a key lime pie, which is, key lime pie. It had like a macadamia crust. And then the filling was avocado with lime juice and coconut oil and maple syrup and vanilla powder. And then they made a meringue with coconut flesh.
Oh, wow.
And sunflower lecithin and coconut oil. So it was really buttery and silky. Am I making you hungry?
My mouth's watering right now. Stop it, darn it.
My mouth's watering too.
Yeah, I mean, it was just like, oh my God, that's vegan, that's raw. There were no processed ingredients. The coconuts were coming from the palms, and they were growing avocados in Thailand. And oh my God. So the key lime pie, passion fruit cheesecake, that's another one.
Yeah.
When you've got really good passion fruits and it's really tangy. With a bit, so you squeeze the passion fruits out and you blend them with some lime juice. So you get that really tart zing from the passion fruit, sweetened with a bit of maple syrup. So a nice firm passion fruit cheesecake. And then the other ones are like a banoffee pie.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you know that one. They're my faves. I mean, I did a chocolate salted caramel the other day, which is good, but yeah. It's funny, like we were talking though before, you know, you can go through stages where you're really attracted to one food group, like Phil with his kale salads, and suddenly something happens. It's like, no, maybe I'm going to go into some sprouted foods.
Yeah.
Or maybe I'm going to get into juicing for a while, and it's always kind of changing, because the sweets I was into for a while, developing those, and then it was almost like, okay, done with that. Now I need some savory mains, or, you know, so yeah. I'd eat some key lime pie if you've got some.
Yeah. I do my best not to have pies in the fridge.
Yeah.
They don't last very long. I've got a bit of a sweet tooth. So have you actually, do you ever culture the cashews or something to make the actual cheese and the cakes with?
Yeah, always. So I always ferment the cashews.
Oh, cool.
So it's a fermented cashew base.
Yeah.
Sometimes I use Thai coconut or the green coconut flesh in there as well. But I always ferment the cashews. I didn't in the beginning. In the first couple of years of doing raw vegan,
Yeah.
I would just soak them for 8-10 hours. But yeah, I don't know, probably, yeah, it's kind of an automatic thing, probably for 7-8 years now.
It definitely makes a difference in digestibility when you do that. Like it changes it.
Yeah.
So if you like, I remember in the old school, and I was starting in raw food, the desserts were always like just really heavy in the nuts, like no fermentation, just like, and you would just like feel so heavy and tired. But like I could have a piece of like fermented cheesecake. Susan makes a really great one, and it feels great. You know, it's like I don't feel heavy, it digests well. So that the fermentation is an important piece of that, I think. So
Yeah, big time. And also you've got that flavor, that sourness to it as well.
Yeah, it helps, doesn't it?
It really, really helps. And the fact that you know that it's been fermented, you know that you're giving your gut some, you know, some more benefits than just having dessert.
Yeah.
You
Have
know?
you ever tried fermenting, getting cacao beans and blending those and fermenting those? Have you tried doing that with that?
No, I haven't.
So if you just get cacao beans the same as you would with cashews,
Yeah.
and soak them,
Yeah.
and then blend them, and then put probiotics in, and then culture them in the fridge.
oh,
Wow. And
what
you
does
use
that
that?
do?
Yeah. What does that do? Is that for a cheesecake?
You can use that then for any dessert you want to, because it's actually then fermented cacao.
And how does it change the flavor? Is it
Yeah,
texture?
well, because you've soaked the cacao, it's not as full on. It's a much more what's the word I'm looking for? Subtle. It's a much more subtle flavor.
Okay.
I mean, that's what I mean, because
Sounds
we're
good.
like in raw food, we've got like we're used to these like this strong cacao or chocolate, whereas like kind of mainstream like cocoa powder is not quite as intense. So
Oh,
like that makes sense. Like so you get a raw food chocolate fudge cake, and it's very intense. Like there's the bitterness there is really strong. So I imagine that fermentation is very helpful in mellowing that out a little bit and getting it more like cooked kind of thing. So
it makes it so much more digestible, you know, and also it's definitely not as buzzy. It just mellows the whole thing out, and actually you can make a really nice kind of gooey dessert with that. And again, all the cacao it's then cultured, and it's full of all the probiotics. So it takes the cacao pudding to a whole nother level.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. Fun.
Because otherwise it is, when you have that raw cacao, it really is like a kick. Yeah. You know, your whole nervous system is like, oh, you know, especially if you've been detoxing for a while, and then you get some cacao.
Yeah, I mean, I love it.
Yeah,
I have to be really careful with cacao, otherwise I suffer. It's as simple as that. I suffer,
right,
and I don't like it.
Yeah, it is. It's stimulating,
but
it's like you have the raw cacao, and then you have, you know, like regular cocoa. Two totally different well, it is like two totally different ingredients.
Yeah,
you know, and in the kitchens, you know, way back 20 plus years ago, we would get big blocks of chocolate, like 20-30 kilo blocks from Switzerland. but it was already processed. It was already roasted. It was already mixed with sugar and dairy. So you'd have your 80% dark or your milk or your white. There was always that fat content in there, and that then you would start making your desserts from. Whereas when fast forward into the raw vegan kitchen, I never knew what raw cacao looked like. I'd never seen raw cacao powder, cacao butter. I had no idea how to make chocolate. And even those fine restaurants back in those days were buying these slabs of 20 kilos of chocolate and then turning it into the desserts. So that was a big eye opener when I went into the kind of raw vegan, because with the raw vegan they were really breaking it down to the simple ingredients, like right back to basics, and somebody would be able to tell you what the properties of that ingredient had, where that was sourced from. Whereas the Michelin kitchens, it was right, order 20 kilos from Switzerland, and totally different kind of energy, totally different. Yeah,
and of course once you start culturing like the cacao beans, so if you're using the cacao bean, you've got once again you've actually then got a whole food as opposed to all the bits of the components. So you've got a whole food, and then by blending it and culturing it, then you're actually then breaking all that down and actually turning it into a much more digestible food product.
And because it's raw, you've also got the nutritional profile in there as well.
Yes.
Because all the standard chocolate, it's all been roasted, and all of the magnesium and all the beneficial compounds, they've all been taken out.
Yeah.
So, that's it's a game changer. Just that one simple thing, like fermenting the nut, fermenting the cashews. That's a game changer.
And fermenting coconut.
Yeah.
I think that's probably my favorite product out of everything. A made product. If I could only have one thing, it would be cultured coconuts.
So like a little coconut yogurt or something, right?
Yeah, beautiful.
Or cultured mango. Have you tried culturing mango, Sarmado?
No, not yet.
Cultured mango. It's when I was in Thailand doing a bit of a detox and thing on my own with my partner, I tried culturing everything. Every fruit you can think of, probably I've tried culturing it. Bananas are great, but the top of it just goes brown like goo.
Oh, really?
But underneath, then they're really good. Watermelon didn't culture at all. That wasn't very good at all.
And what did you do? Was it the whole fruit?
Yeah.
Yeah, you did.
You blended it, and then
blended it, and then put the probiotic in it, and then cultured it.
Nice.
And, mango worked. Cultured mango is amazing. So a cultured mango tart, like a little pie, is amazing. And
but then you got the nice Thai mangoes as well to do it with. There's beautiful.
Well, yeah, that's a whole nother ball game, isn't it?
Yeah.
Cultured Thai mangoes, that's a whole nother level.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead.
And I think something also changes, because when I was in Thailand, the mangoes would culture every single time. And I think because the mangoes, when we get them, they're not actually fully ripened. They're not tree ripened. So I reckon sometimes they don't culture. And I'm just thinking about this as we're talking.
Yeah.
But I've noticed sometimes they don't culture properly. And I do wonder if that's because the sugars aren't mature.
I think you're right. Yeah.
I wonder if the sugars actually aren't really there.
Yeah.
So as they're tree ripened, I imagine the sugars are right at the top of their game. So every single time when I was in Thailand, the mango's cultured. But actually here, and I hadn't figured that out until we were just talking, sometimes it doesn't culture.
Well, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, these foods are stored in containers, and it just kind of is making me. I made a note. It reminds me of a couple of like food experiences I've had and people haven't had this, of what is fresh food actually like. Like one of my most memorable experiences was in Glastonbury, and I don't know if it's still there, but there was this mulberry tree in Glastonbury, and the mulberries were ripe, and we were up the tree, and I remember them like you put your hand and they would like drip off into your hand, and it's like eating these mulberries.
Yeah.
That was one of my most memorable food experiences. It was just, and it just melted into the body, and it was just like we were like laughing, we were like so high, and like all we were eating was like mulberries, and we climbed up a tree in Glastonbury, you know, in the cathedral grounds there. So, and then the other experience was I was down in the Yucatan, and down there every day they have fresh markets. So there's these people at the markets, and they've brought produce that they've picked out of their gardens and their neighbors' gardens and neighbors' trees, and these amazing fruits. And they're there like with big smiles on their faces, giving you like with these offerings from their gardens that they picked that morning or the day before. And that food was the most nourishing I've ever had. And then I came back to the States, and I got some store-bought avocados or whatever. I was like, ew, these are like gross. Like it was like, oh shoot. Like we're used to eating a certain way, but we're not used to eating like what does fresh food really taste like? Because even the fresh food in the store, like we said, it's like it's been picked sometimes a couple of weeks earlier. I've heard that like sometimes it can be stored weeks, you know, in different storage containers or whatever. And then by the time we get it, it's like it's not fresh anymore, and we don't even know what it's like to experience fresh food. So it's great when we can, like you did, Phil. So
yeah. So, just gonna add to that, Phil. When I did that juice fast in lockdown, I got hold of one of my organic suppliers and phoned them and said, look, you know, this is what I'm doing. Can you get me an order out? And they got me an order out, and it arrived in the front porch. And in the morning, because I hadn't had an order from them for quite a while for an event, and I opened the front porch, and the porch just oozed vegetables, and it was just like, so I just stood there in awe, going, wow. And it was just such a different experience from the food in the shops.
Yeah.
You know, it was just it still come from Spain, it still come from Africa or Morocco or wherever it had come from. You know, they do their best to get stuff as locally as they can, but when when you're doing a fruit juice fast and you're doing oranges and things like that, you know, they just come from where they come from, right? But the vibration of that, you know, the bottom line is the vibration of that food was off the scale compared to the organic food that I buy in the shops. It was just like, wow, this is so different.
Yeah.
You know, and I know this stuff, and it still blew me away.
Yeah, it's really special, isn't it? I mean, because it is life force, it feels alive. And the produce that they sell in a supermarket, well, maybe it's been sprayed, maybe it's been picked under ripe, maybe it's been in transit. You know, there was one guy, I heard a story, it was a few years ago, he was an apple grower, and he got a contract with one of the major supermarkets here, and his farm was close to the local supermarket, and he set up this contract to supply that chain with his apples. And he worked out, because he saw his apples on their shelf, that those apples had done something like 200 miles radius before they ended up in a supermarket that was literally miles down the road from him, because they take the apples and then they put them in a central distribution kind of center, and they all get packed up in plastic and then shipped out on the trucks all over the UK. Because when you look at the centenarians and those that lived the longest, allegedly, part of that is that they're only eating foods in their local area. So they're eating whatever's growing and whatever's in season. I mean, in the UK now, I mean, Brussels sprouts and some kale. So we have to mix it up. I mean, I bought a watermelon today, and that was from Spain. But you know, this organic produce, even when you see the organic and the conventional, when they photograph it with Kirlian photography, the frequency is totally different, and the nutrient content of that organic compared to the conventional is way higher.
It's something like 3 to 5 times higher, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. Yeah, I think once you get into the whole raw vegan movement as well, it does make you appreciate your food much more. So you really start looking at it.
I think it's because you're taking in consciousness that changes consciousness.
Yeah.
And it's interesting with the organic food, at least we know that like some of the others like permaculture and straight out of the garden has got higher nutrient, but they've done comparisons side by side with organic and conventional. And in a lab, they kind of look the same. Like nutritionally, sometimes they're very, very similar. But anyone who looks at that food and picks up that food knows it's different. There's something different about this. But and then in the media, like, oh, nutritionally, the organic and conventional is no different. But like we know that there's so much more subtle energy to that. If you just focus on like the top 10 nutrients, like, well, maybe they are very similar, but we know that there's so much more to it, you know. So
Yeah.
which is what this whole show's about today. So
Yeah.
Roundup on it for one, have you, Phil?
what's that?
It isn't laden with Roundup for one, is it?
Well, that's definitely a critical piece. So
You haven't
sure.
got, you haven't got broccoli Roundup soup.
Well, I said somebody asked it. It's good that you mentioned it as well, Phil. This new year, new you. Somebody had asked, well, why should I go for the organic produce rather than conventional? Because here in the UK, if you go to the supermarket, the organic is really high, highly priced. It's expensive if you go to the supermarket. And yet if you go to the box schemes or your local farms or the growers, you can pick it up cheaper sometimes than the conventional produce in the supermarket. So that's
I think we've got to break out of that system. Like to get fresh food, we've got to be doing the box schemes, like like you say, and like Phil had delivered, and we got to have gardens, and we've got to be growing food. We've got to get back to that. I think we've lost touch with that. Here in America, everyone has a swimming pool in the back garden. Imagine if we all had a little food garden, and we shared with each other. We would be able to feed each other and prepare amazing. Like my experience in the Yucatan, everybody had a fruit tree or something in their garden, and we're growing and sharing with their neighbors. And I think we got to go back to that. And I see, I see what my family have done. My parents got a house in the country, and they've got a big garden, and they're growing all sorts of food, and they're so much happier. They've got food growing right there. So it's critical. I think that's going to be the shift that we're going to go through with all this. We're going to be like, oh, we don't want to be dependent on the system anymore. We're going to create food forests. That's my dream anyway.
Yeah,
absolutely, Phil.
Yeah,
food forests.
Yeah.
Food forests. Here we come with the kitchen in the garden.
Yeah. It's definitely the future. I mean, it just brings, if people are growing food, it creates community.
Yeah.
I noticed here in the springtime this year, when we went into our first lockdown, I've got a couple of lawns out the front of the house, and I dug those up and turned them into vegetable beds.
Oh, brilliant. Back garden, did you?
No, that's where we sit and eat the food. So yeah, I dug it up, and what was amazing, not just because people were in lockdown and they were walking around more than usual, but the amount of conversations that I had with people from the village, where they were telling me about what they were growing, or they're asking about what I was growing, or suddenly there was this connection. The garden was, when they saw I was in it, they were seeing food growing, and there were kids and their dogs and people were walking around, and it was like, oh, what's going on over there? And it was a really good conversation starter, because when you've got food growing, you do feel that sense of abundance. And then when there was a lady and she was saying, oh my God, you got so many figs in the tree. I was like, yeah, well, when you're popping by next time, if they're ripe, you can take some. And then I was like, oh, really? Can I? It's like, yeah, there's loads in the tree. I can't eat them all. My girlfriend can't eat them all. And so that was feeling really good. It's like, wow, if that fig tree has started a conversation, now we can start talking about food. How can we support one another? And that's what people used to do. They would barter, okay, well, here's some figs. Well, you've got, I don't know, spinach, or you've got kale. And having those kind of micro economies or communities starting where you can realize that, wow, we can actually do something together. It feels really, really good, you know, and I don't use Roundup. I don't use any chemicals in the, you know, on any of the food, and it feels good, and birds are coming in the garden and the bees are coming in. And, you know, I know there were children looking at the garden who probably had never seen where their food comes from.
Oh, wow.
You know, because, you know, if you're a parent and, you know, you're trying to teach your kids at home now, and you're trying to keep your job and keep the wheels spinning, then you don't have the time to do these things.
Just to add in there with the kids at home
Yeah.
and everyone else, one of the things that I've realized is, like, if you're gardening, every aspect of learning for a child is in gardening. Every aspect. You know, you've got to learn to order the seed. Even if you're doing your own gardening, you can either go to the shops and buy the seeds, or you can order the seeds online. Now, that's part of the thing. How many seeds do you need? How many seeds do you need for a certain area? How many potatoes do we need to eat? So you've got maths in it. All of a sudden, you've got maths in gardening. You've got, you know, how big an area are we gonna section off for the carrots? How big an area are we gonna? So you've got measuring, you've got adding, you've got dividing, you've got all that aspect. You've got, you know, phoning up the suppliers. So you've got that communication skill going on, phoning up the suppliers. Then you've got you can take your lovely figs, and you can then make a fig and cacao pie, right? So then the child learns about the recipe. It learns to read recipe, which again is adding. It's taking all these ingredients, it's creating. So there's the art class straight away. So if you focus properly on any subject, whether it's just in the kitchen, just in the garden, doing a bit of DIY, whatever it is, that's the whole learning subject. Is in one thing. You know, we don't need to isolate everything. We just need to thoroughly go through anything that we're doing with a child, go through the whole thing. You know, and the exciting thing, like on a kitchen table, is to have a map of the world and go, the Brazil nuts have come from Brazil. And this particular cacao has been grown underneath the Brazil nuts because the Brazil nuts create a canopy. So the cacao beans are basically an undercrop. And then you learn that Brazil nuts, for example, take 300 years before they produce their first nut. Did you know that?
No. Wow.
300 years before they produce their first nut. So the thing that keeps the Brazil nut tree safe is the cacao crop underneath it. So this is what incredible. So this is what we've got to look at, is a synergy of what we're eating. Well, once you take the cacao from underneath the Brazil nut, because no one's buying it, because it's got to be flown halfway around the world, you've lost the purpose for the Brazil nut tree to be alive, because it's not producing nuts at this stage. Therefore, it becomes timber. So grow the cacao underneath it. You need the Brazil as the shelter cover, and then it produces nuts, and then it's another crop. So you learn that from the kitchen table of you know, that there. If you were making a brownie, you've got the Brazil nuts. Let's just say you've got the Brazil nuts from Brazil, you've got the cacao from Ecuador or from Peru or from Africa, depending on where it's coming from. You've got all that geography going on your tablecloth, because you might say, right, we've got 5 ingredients. What country do they come from? And you read the label and you push the food product onto that different country. So then you can start to learn about food miles, how many miles they've actually done, who's created it, what's involved in that product, by having the world tablecloth on there with all of your food products. That's education.
Brilliant. It's really good. And I saw an article the other day, and it was saying very similar to what you were sharing, Phil, is that, you know, in these times, hopefully this is what's going to happen, that because the kids are being homeschooled, they're going to be learning these things in all of the components, like the gardening, but in a way that's really supportive for the child, where they're learning mathematics and geography and cooking and all of the creativity that goes with that. They're getting the life skills from it. Beautiful. So that's the upside of
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
As long as though we take the time for the consideration, because at the moment I think a lot of parents are in that, oh, we've got to learn some maths, or we've got to learn some
Yeah.
thingy, we've got to do a bit of
Yeah.
art. But
Yeah.
actually, if you're gardening, if you're cooking, if you're walking in nature, it's a full lesson.
Yeah.
There's no
Especially that the younger kids, you don't need to have any formal lesson plans. You just need to have a rich life. You're out in nature and you're living like the formal, like, okay, we're going to get to reading and you're going to get these books. No, but let's wait till after you're like 7. I don't know the exact age, but they just need to live,
Yeah. Because if I think of the history lessons and the geography and some of the other subjects I studied at school, well, I don't remember using a lot of that.
Trigonometry is my favorite one.
Oh yeah, trigonometry. Yeah, that comes out every day.
I tell you what, though, you laugh. I went to college.
Yeah.
And I started studying roofing. It was
Right.
all about trigonometry. So it's, I think when we pick a subject like, as we're on the subject now, gardening or cooking, I'm going to say cooking as opposed to chefing, but cooking. Every aspect of life is in any trade. I'm going to repeat that again. Every aspect of life is in any trade.
Yeah.
And we've forgotten that. What we think is, oh, cooking's about cooking. Cooking's about cooking if you've forgotten.
Yeah.
To look at where the foods come from, to look at how the food's produced, to look at who's produced it, to take the time. So yes, your breakfast might take 2 hours instead of 10 minutes, but actually there's your lesson with your child. You go for a walk in nature, you see a bird that neither of you know, you come back home, I say birds because that was my passion, that kept me alive when I was a kid, was the birds. You come home, you get your book out, you sit down for half an hour and you read about that bird. You read about the bird's migration. You read about its nesting habitat. You read about how many eggs it has. You read about what the incubation period of each bird and each egg, because each bird's going to have a different incubation period. You're going to learn that some of them are ground nesting birds, some of them are tree nesting birds, some of them are, they nest on reeds. You learn their flight patterns. It's everything you look at is a complete and utter subject. You don't need to separate anything. Go out in nature, come home, have a little diary and write what you've seen. If trees are your thing, come home and write down what trees you've seen. If you don't know what the tree is, get a piece of paper when you're on your walk and a crayon, and then come home and get your books out, get on a computer, and you've got a lesson.
Yeah.
It's like Phil, and I love that, Phil. What you need is a rich life.
Yeah.
And actually,
that is a rich life.
And you need
it's rich but simple. It would be simple, but it's rich. It's like simplicity.
Yeah. But you need time. You instead of carving 4 hours to sit and do one particular subject, pick a real subject. And can you imagine spending 4 hours making dinner, making your lunch? Not necessarily 4 hours, you could spend 2, but spend that same time really understanding what I was saying earlier, where it's come from, how it's produced, what it's made. And then you can go deeper into the nutrients of it all. And it's so rich, but it takes time. But it doesn't take any longer to do that than having a lesson about anything else.
Yeah.
And you've got dinner at the end of it, right? Talk about the kids will be, well, when you finish this, you can eat.
Yeah, brilliant. And the thing is that teaching kids to cook, teaching children to take care of themselves, beautiful. And it was something I'd seen not long ago. It said, when you're actively engaged in the art of cooking, it's one of the only things that you do that engages all 5 senses at the same time. You're fully absorbed. It's really the meditation, going back on what you both shared before about the awareness and the consciousness and the energy that you put into the food. If you're fully in that, even if it's with the child having that 4-hour cookery lesson and then getting to eat it at the end, you're fully immersed in it. That rich life, going for that walk in the nature, being aware of the birds and the nesting patterns, fully immersing yourself in that. It's like whatever you're doing, being really total in it. And then what comes through, you can really feel it. And that's, you know, going back on the food side, that energy that comes through the food, it's like, oh my God, that brownie was unbelievable. There was something about that. And it's not the ingredients, it's what's come through.
Yeah, and that's that thing, isn't it, about really exploring every, you know, and I think from this, actually, what I want to encourage people to do is really explore every ingredient that they're using. It doesn't just come from Sainsbury's or Tesco's, right? It has to come from somewhere first.
That's a brilliant thing to mention, because I picked up some things thinking that they'd only come from France recently, Phil, and when I actually looked at the ingredients, it had China on the back.
Yeah, you got to be careful with the Chinese one.
That's popping up a lot.
Yeah,
But this, yeah,
organics.
With organics, very big.
Especially with organics. So
yeah.
That's another, so you just brought me on to another one there, Sarmado, which is the pollution and heavy metals. So really be aware of the pollution and heavy metals from China in their organic food. It's I don't buy any food from China.
No, good. Well done. Yeah.
Just because of that. Sorry, I hijacked you.
No. It's really good. I mean, that's the thing. If there's one thing that you tell people or share with people to do for 2021 with food, really tune in and see where your food comes from, because the more local your food, the higher the frequency, the higher the nutritional content. It also, if you're buying from a farm scheme, like a box scheme or a local supplier or producer or grower, that also benefits the local community. And actually, when you're shopping in the community, you actually start having conversations. You start talking to people about things that matter. The girl that's on the till at Waitrose or whatever supermarket, I mean, yeah, having a nice day, thank you, bye. You know, that's it.
They do that 1,000 times a day, don't they?
Yeah, you know, but they've proven that whenever any money gets spent locally, the effect that has on the local economy. And it would support local businesses. It would support us growing and creating this new kind of vision that we want to see, where we're all kind of harmoniously creating the future that we want to live, that food traceability or that food sourcing benefits everybody, you know, and not the big corporations, but the environment in which we all live. It's huge.
Well, Sarmado, I think we've got a lot, me, you and Phil have got a lot to share on this subject.
Yes. It's the whole rabbit warren in itself.
Just getting started by the feeling. And, you know, and it's really nice doing this because, you know, we're all starting to get to know each other and the fact that I've had a conversation with Sarmado before Christmas, I think that was about an hour and a half, and
that was good.
Time in the end, and yeah, and I think that there's a lot of conversation to be had here.
Yeah, we're just having real conversations. I am more conscious from this conversation. Like, these are the real conversations that, you know, there's a lot of distraction right now in the world, but these are the conversations we need to have every day. We've got to get back. Like, there's a lot of distractions, so many. It's like, let's come back to these real conversations about how we can heal, how we can grow and prepare food in the most conscious way. So,
yeah, it's the conversations. You're right, Phil. Yeah, because whatever distractions and wacky, crazy stuff that's going on out there, when we can share like this consciously about what we can do together, we feel good, we feel uplifted, we feel purposeful. It's like, that's why I'm here. That's what I can do. I can put my peas in the ground tomorrow morning, or, you know, there's something that makes me feel alive. And all of those distractions, especially at the moment, they're not making people feel good.
You know, and that actually, Sarmado, is why this show was born, was because of all the fear, all the anxiety, all of the upset. And we were just like, come on, let's just sit down and tell people what they can do.
Yeah.
There's all this what you can't do now, and actually there's not a lot you can do, but there's a lot.
Yeah.
In our world. world that you can do, right? There's still a lot you can do. And, you know, and in fact, it's, I think for lots of people, it's made people stop and realize that actually they're not going to work. They're not running around. They're not being headless chickens. There's actually lots they can do.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what, you know, talking about this, you know, and that's what it's all about, as well as reminding each other simple things like drink your lemon water first thing in the morning, go buy a melon and chuck it in a blender and blend it, and you know, and have your watermelon juice in the afternoon instead of grabbing for that Coke or that bag of crisps or whatever else you do. You know, get yourself prepared, get some carrots sliced up in the fridge, get some cucumber sliced up in the fridge, get some watermelon sliced up in the fridge, get yourselves prepared. And actually, and it's really simple. It's not, you know, we don't have to be in the kitchen for 4 hours. I was just using that as an example to really, you know, learn about what you're eating. So it's you know, it is having conversations, and the table is a great place for having conversations. And now, you know, from when I started my journey with food back in '94, people, you know, back then I wasn't eating wheat and dairy, and you know, I was a nutter. You know, and now loads of people aren't eating wheat and dairy, and it's like, oh, it's normal. Now it's normal. Back then it was, people felt really alienated by me, and they felt rejected. That's what I went through a lot actually with people, was them, interestingly enough, them feeling rejected because I couldn't eat their food. And that, it was actually harder for my experience was, it was much harder for the other people that couldn't make the food they wanted to give me than the fact that I couldn't eat it. And that, you know, looking back now, it was much harder for them than it was for me, because I'd made up my mind that, you know, it wasn't good for me, I wasn't eating it. And it's like, well, what do you eat then? You know, I remember a mate of mine said to me, but if you're not eating wheat and dairy, Phil, isn't your diet really narrow? And I was like, wow, because their diet consisted of wheat and dairy three or four times a day. But the wheat was called toast, cereals, croissant, baguette, sandwich, Weetabix, pasta. And actually, they were on a mono diet. Mono diet of wheat. So it was, and actually, what I said is, no, what's happened is my diet's actually gone like that, because I've now got to look for something else to eat. But the level of rejection that people felt with me was actually, looking back, this conversation with you, Sarmado, is just making me realize that the amount of rejection other people felt from me, and they took it personally.
Well, it's been an amazing show. Do we want to? I think we've been on about an hour and a half. Do we want to come to a close?
An hour and a half.
That was good.
Went deep.
Rabbit hole, Sarmado. So I really appreciate you coming on our show and sharing.
Yeah, thank you. What a great conversation, just about consciousness and food. Beautiful.
Yeah, brilliant. No, it's been really good. Thank you both. It's been
I hope everybody out there has enjoyed it and been inspired. And I mean, that's our hope. Our only hope from this show is that, you know, it inspires more conversation, inspires transformation and change. And, you know, it's for our growth, for your growth. So thank you for everybody who's joined us. I noticed some people on YouTube, Facebook, and then there's some people here on Zoom. So that's great.
So all I'm going to remind everybody is this was about a new year and a new you. So the takeaway from this is, whatever you do it consciously.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, I'm Phil.
And I'm Phil.
And this has been another episode of the Phil and Phil Show with a special guest. So we really appreciate everybody. And you can check us out on Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, all those crazy channels. And if you want to contribute to our show, you just go to philandphil.com and you can use the donate button on PayPal. And we appreciate that support to keep our website up and keep doing what we're doing. So thank you, everyone. We wish you great health, consciousness, abundance, love, healing, and connection with your family. So thank you.
Thank you both.
Thank you, Sarmado.